Super excited to have my next guest on. Ann Barnes is the CEO of Etica Naturals, and she's going to be sharing today about shifting your program and perception for yourself and others. So, Ann, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing with our audience today from your perspective, your experience. Yeah, I'm just really, really grateful to have you here and honored to hear what you have to share.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, so I guess the first thing that I would say about sort of like how I came to this, I guess there's two things, like coming to, the point of being this, lawyer, entrepreneur, blah, blah, blah. And then realizing at that point that that's not going so well. And then shifting and figuring out how to, I would say, I'm learning every day. So it's not like I figured this out, but I'm definitely on the path of a different journey, which is to be a conscious entrepreneur and a conscious human being. And that is changing how I live my life and how I do business, on all aspects.
Mm,
So, yeah. So in terms of like how I would say how I got programmed, if I can sort of use that term, when I look back now, I can really see that, the way that I am now today and the way that I was at like 5 years old is pretty much the same person, but it took me a very long path to kind of like go through to get to that knowledge base to look back and be like, wow, you just took a really, really long time to get back to point A, literally, right? Um, but yeah, I would say that, I literally was told at a young age, you should go to university, you got to do really well at school, like you've got to excel, you have to be the best at what you do, like whatever you choose to do, it has to be the best. So a lot of like pressure. And then it was like for me, okay, that means I'm going to, either take this creative path or I'm going to go and do something like professional, which, would somehow impress the family, which was law. So I ended up doing the law thing and going down that path, which was a total journey. And, I can look back and see how I literally kind of like my perception of it at each step of the way. Like, what did I think this life was going to be like? Like, what was it really like? And realizing at a certain point, like, wow, now I can look back on it and say, I so had this perception of what all of this was going to be like, which led me to make those decisions. And then when you actually realize what the reality of that is, it's very different. So, and then
mm,
it's like, um, the Talking Heads song, like you may ask yourself, like, how did I get here? Like there was one of those moments, like, how did I get here?
mm.
Through a lot of programming, really, perceptions of what something was going to be that really does not exist.
Yeah, and that's it's really important, especially we're since the day one, we're really talking about how to open um, to possibility, to new perspectives,
Yeah.
to um, be able to change your personality and therefore your personal reality. So really, moving beyond the programming, the thoughts of, who we think we are,
Yeah.
to realize that we really can create any identity that we want. But it first starts with
Yes.
being open to that's even, is that even a possibility?
So I actually, great, great segue, because literally when I moved from big city to smaller city to go to law school, I literally, I had such a stigma, I guess, in my mind attached to me in terms of like what the perception was of me, like by family, which was sort of black sheep, Anne's too aggressive. blah, 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 whatever that is, like whatever that is, right? And then, you know, the circumstances with friends, and you're like, wow, like you think I'm like that. And I remember actually, I literally was driving my own rental, my U-Haul truck or whatever, like a long way. And I was on this highway and I literally said to myself, like, Anne, you can be anything that you want. Like nobody knows you at this new law school, right? Like there's nothing that's residual. So you are whomever you show up as. And
Mm.
that was actually like, I remember the exact moment that I thought that. And like literally I thought that, and it was like a welcome to, and you know, like here's like my law school town, right? Like it literally was like that crazy a moment. And I still remember that because it's so true. Like that was a conscious decision that I made to say, I don't have to carry all of this shit. They don't know what, and it's nothing, not that I'd done anything wrong. It was just people's perceptions of something that had happened, or my perception of how I
Mm.
existed in my family unit, like blah, 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 right? It's the blah, blah, blah that I was just like, I don't have to live with this. And literally it allowed me a great sense of freedom, and allowed me to like really sort of like look at it a lot more kind of like objectively about, well, what do I want? Like not what's the perception of Anne and what she wants. It's like,
Mm.
well, no, what do I want? Right. So it's yeah, and I think that was an important moment for me as part of my evolution of, you know, getting back to the 5-year-old, if that makes sense. But saying like, well, what do you really want? And who are you? Right? Like who are you outside of
Mm.
your perception of you as, you know, Anne in a family, or Anne in a certain like nationality, or Anne comes from this school, and Anne went to this law school, and you know, like Anne's got this title. Like those were all things at some point that mattered to me. But as the more I got involved in that lifestyle, you know, the more I realized that it was like a conscious perception of myself that I could change. Like, I don't need to do this just because I have that title. I don't need to have that. I don't need to follow along in someone's perception of who I am. I have to follow along in what my soul is telling me to do. And I think
Mm.
that's like, that takes a lot of work, because you have to like work consciously, and that is difficult when you come from like a land of like talking voices constantly, right? um and we all have that, like we all suffer from that. So it's just acknowledging that this is constantly going, and we got to shut this down and be like coming back into this, and then able to like say, hey, I can actually be what I want to be. I can be what my wildest dream is. I can make this happen. And you will. When you believe it, you will.
So how does someone get to that point? Because, again, you've mentioned programs and perception, and there's this wiring of and development of the conscious mind that happens at such a young age, where we're perceiving everything going on around us, other people's thoughts about themselves and each other and relationships and health and money and all these things, and then that kind of becomes our operating system. And most people will operate in that way, with somebody else's thoughts, kind of living a life designed for someone else,
Yes.
rather than being able to say, well, wait a minute, is this really who I am? Is this really what I want? Is this, really the direction I want to go in my life? So, barring some catastrophic event where, it's going to shake somebody awake and realize, wait a minute, like I want to go in this direction instead of this one. How does somebody come to that awareness?
I'd love to sprinkle like, fairy dust on this beautiful Sunday with the maraschino cherry on top. And I'm just going to say it sucks. I'm just going to totally be frank. It sucks. It's difficult to become conscious. It's difficult to live in a conscious way. I struggle with it. I've struggled with it. And it's like, it's facing your demons. It's facing not only yours, but probably your generational ones. Because once you realize what yours are, and maybe I shouldn't use that word demons. I don't want to give it any more energy than it needs, but like just traumas, right? So whether that's like, personal trauma that you've gone through, but then, what I found personally is that you start to sort of realize that that's also something that, you can probably look back on and say, hey, there's patterns here too. Like there's patterns in my family. And it's just really getting rid of not getting rid of, but I guess I would say like accepting, flowing through, tackling, be aware of, reverse engineer, what your trauma is, without being victimized by it, but almost like looking at it as a third party objectively. How has this affected me? How have I internalized this? How is it reflected in good decisions, bad decisions? Those are all your decisions and you own all of it. And that's a big trip too, to say, hey, I own this. And so, yeah, I would say that that's like a really big step. And from that, you can, it forces you to, when you're going down that path, it forces you to live in a conscious state, but it also allows you to like let go of so many things, and to release a lot of like that heaviness that we've been carrying for so long, and really that heaviness that's allowed us to be programmed in the first instance, right? Because like when you're not living in fear, when you're not living in anxiety, when you're not living in regret or shame or anger, those big ones, like those are like, that's just like, oh, okay, next. Okay, that's great. And you can kind of like shed it, but you're not going to shed it all at once. It's like stone by stone, so it's like a big backpack of like a whole bunch of rocks, right? And you're dealing with each rock and you're tossing it out. But there's no magic. There's no magic to this. It's not like I can dump the whole thing and it's like, yay, got through the drive-through and got rid of the rocks and now I'm ready to go. Like that would be just magical, but unfortunately that's not how it works. I don't think that's how it's intended to work. And you're learning, for me, my learning was dramatic as a result of like going through that process. And I would say that, as somebody that is trained as political science, economic background, legal background, all that, I'm always looking at global like politics and blah, blah, blah. And this is what's happening. All of that out there, you realize doesn't matter. It's like truly this work within of pushing through it, not sitting in it and being victimized by it. That's a totally different trip, right? That's a different journey. But when you're working through it and you're actively and consciously trying to heal yourself and to get into more of a flow rather than a stop and go, which is what trauma is, it's the greatest gift, but it's also the hardest journey, I would say. Like other than being a parent, it's a hard journey.
Hardest and most rewarding, I always say.
Yeah, and most rewarding. Like the greatest gift, right? The
Yeah.
greatest gift. But I always say that like your greatest gift usually comes in the strangest package.
Yeah.
There's great learning in things that you believe are actually not a gift at all, but they end up being like beautiful deliverance of knowledge, right? From something that might seem to be traumatic or not in your best interest at the time. but it actually becomes and manifests into like something very great.
Yeah, I always say everything is happening for us.
Yeah, and that's a very different way of like viewing life, right? Like
Mhm.
rather than why is this happening to me? It's like, the way I'm trying to see things now is what do I need to learn, or what is the gift of knowledge in this?
Yeah, that's the opportunity.
What's the opportunity?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So, like you've mentioned consciousness a few times. So, what does that mean to you, and how does one become more conscious?
Mm. Yeah, good question. Okay, so for me, consciousness means um not when I'm speaking to you right now, I'm not in any way connected to the past, and I'm not connected to how my perception is of you in the past, any conversations we've had in the past. And I'm not trying to project anything into the future while I'm talking to you. I'm not thinking about what this would look like to the viewer. I'm not thinking about what the impact of this will be, other than really listening to what you're asking me and having like an honest response. So
Mm,
that to me is conscious living. And that means shutting this down into all the myriad of things that could be going on right now. Like, my dogs are barking in the background. Like, can you hear it? Like, worry, worry, worry. Like, all like little, like the little, like, what do you call them? Like sticky notes, right? That you just that
mhm.
start to be stuck all over you. And you're like, what is this? Like, why do I care about that? So conscious thought to me is basically like literally being aware that you're letting go of things. You're aware of what you're listening to. You are aware of like, you end up becoming like aware of like a lot more things, I think, the more time you spend doing it. So I just find now I'm a lot more aware of like the different levels of things that I'm hearing, different light sources. Like I'm a lot more aware of empathically, like what people are feeling, even like what animals are feeling, like any stress that they're having.
Mm.
Just becoming a lot more aware of the subtleties of like life, which, when we're hyper engaged in either kind of depressive acts, which are like in the past, and then future stress, which is anxiety, right? Is dichotomy that you're never living in like right now. You're living
Mm.
in future, or you're living in past. And I was doing both of that before. I never lived in this, ever, ever.
How would you say your life has changed now that you're able to do that? And what could people expect by coming, what sounds to me like coming into the present moment?
Yeah, no, that's it exactly. That's it exactly. I would say that like my relationships on every level like are a lot deeper, because I'm listening, and I'm not projecting in terms of what they're saying. Like I'm really taking it for it in its exact moment. Um, I think I'm a way better at pretty much all aspects of my life, including, I would say, business, because I don't need to take the time that I used to need to do things. Like I find that my decision making is a lot clearer. I need less time to make decisions. I feel like I get a lot more information like very clearly presented to me. um, I see people, I see situations, I see problems before they happen. I Yeah, I'm a much more efficient like business person, parent, sister, like all of those things. Like, and I still have a lot of time for myself, which I make for myself to do that meditative prayer work. And that allows me to have the time to do all the other things.
Mm,
Whereas
that's beautiful.
before I would have been trying to figure it out. Like, oh, I can do this. I'll figure it out. I've got to work an 18-hour day to get done. And it's like now I can do 6 different things during the day because I meditate for that hour or the hour and a half at the
Hmm.
beginning of the
Hmm.
day, and I allow myself to like get, and it's like, okay, yeah, you need to do that, this, that. So the day becomes very structured, even though it began as what a lot of people would seem as unstructured.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds to me like there's it's like you're able to shut off the chaos
Mhm.
and go to that space where you're actually, with the meditation, you're bringing more coherence to the brain. So there's more like, because when we're focused on, doing all the time in the outside world and going from A to B, it creates a lot of incoherence in the brain,
Yeah.
right? And so to be able to shut all that out, to take that time to meditate, to create the coherence in the brain, so that when you go back to do a thing, you're so much more pinpoint precise in
Yeah.
what it is that you're going to do. And so that creates so much time and space for you, because you're not in the chaos anymore. It's like you're separated yourself from it, and now you're the observer of all of it going around, and it doesn't really affect you.
And I would say that it's like twofold. Well, actually, I would say it's threefold. Like, so there, to me, it's like, for me personally, you're right, what you just said, it's the mind. So you're basically calming the mind in the meditation. That's imperative for me every day. I also add like spirit work to that as well, which is where I feel that I literally get downloaded from source, God, Allah, whatever you want to call um that life force. And I feel that I get downloaded on that, especially when I'm in nature and especially when I'm doing like conscious breath work. So I would say that those are imperative. And then the last thing I would add to that is body, which is being aware of body, um, giving your body nutrients. Like I'm a big plant advocate, as you know. So I'm like big on give your body the nutrients that it needs. Try to get as many plants in as you possibly can. And plants do heal. So again, like with that combination of that, um, mind, body, soul work, I feel like, your body becomes like your whole being becomes in a state of flow. And it's not like every day is amazing and every day is like this amazing roller coaster and you're flowing through everything. Like that's just to me like garbage. Like every day is a challenge. But when you're like in more flow than not in flow. And to me, like what I was doing before, everything that I was doing before was the antithesis of flow. The only
Mm.
thing that I did well before was to know that I needed plants for my body. That's the one thing I've been consistent about since I've been 17 years old. But wow, did I go on a trip of like really not making good choices and then deciding that this is not working for me and I need to change this, So
Mm.
the big ones for me to like get to that point was when I was driving to law school and saying I can be a different person and I actually don't have to hold on or be attached to all these perceptions of myself, right?
Mm. Mm.
And then the other side of it is, getting to a kind of a rock bottom state and saying, I need to be in a conscious state of being. How do I do that? And that was very much through like conscious thought, breath work, meditation, and like, really important for, to me for the plant-based supplement side of things as well. And feeding the mind, important.
Mm. So incredible. Um, so we have just a couple minutes left. I want to ask you, what does peak performance mean to you?
Mm. That's a very good question because I think that like peak performance is really very much, I would say, individualized. So what what one person's peak performance is somebody else's. So to me, it would be like really pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, like on those aspects of like mind, body, soul. Like, what are you doing in each one of those three categories that when those three are balanced and functioning like at like boom at peak, like that's when you're pushing yourself out of what you believed was like even really possible. You're like, can I get there? And you're like, yes, you can. You're at peak. But the second you're at peak, you've got a new peak, right? Because it's like, because you've achieved that peak. So I think the trick to life is to know that the peak changes. So when you're 20, like you're physically pushing yourself, right? Like you're pushing your body, that's the right thing at that time with your hormones. And there's a balance to that. But as time goes on as well, like your peak becomes different. Like my peak performance now is not only like measuring myself on all three of those levels, but I'm less focused on peak performance of like, say, body performance than I am now on, say, spiritual performance. Like I expect more from myself on that side of things. So my peak performance now has shifted. And I think that that's, again, very much an individualized experience. Like, like for some people, their peak performance might be literally getting out of bed every day. That is at their peak because they've had a series of like life issues that have changed their focus or what is a measurement in terms of like what they can accomplish. Right. So I think that we all have to celebrate what each one of our peak performances are and also be honest with ourselves about what we are. Like if you're functioning at 60% every single day, you're 40% not committed to your life. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I like what you said at the beginning because it sounded to me like you were saying peak performance means continuing to expand, continuing to push your boundaries, no matter what your boundaries are. And like you said, it's different
Exactly.
for each person.
Exactly. And again, there's no
I love that.
judgment in terms of what that is, right? That's not me projecting upon anybody else. But again, like I know for me, when I was in a really bad state, it was a big deal for me just to like pull myself together to start my day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember somebody saying like it's okay if you don't unload your dishwasher like for a week, like because you just can't even like when you're in a dark place, it's difficult to even like make small things happen. So we have to celebrate where everyone's at and like just keep going, just push yourself a little bit further. If you need a buddy, grab the buddy, like have somebody with you. And we all need to like really encourage each other in terms of like whatever stage we're at and know that there's
Mm-hmm.
no timeline for anybody but your timeline.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. So any words of wisdom to wrap with? Anything you want to leave our viewers with today, Anne?
I think it's just important, like again, I know it's really difficult to separate ourselves out from everybody else's experiences, but there's nobody else like you. Whomever's watching this, listening to this, there's nobody else like you on the planet, like ever, that's ever existed. I think it's like 1 in 4 trillion, like the odds are 1 in 4 trillion. Like we're all so perfectly different. So to compare yourself to somebody else's experience is just really unfair to yourself. And so I think we really have to celebrate everyone's differences and really to support each other on that, but also to like celebrate yourself and say, I am different. I am like 1 in 4 trillion or whatever that crazy number is. It's a miracle. We are all living, breathing, functioning miracles. And we have to like, if you think of yourself as an infinite miracle, like think of like the miraculous things we can all do. when we think of ourselves as miracles. So that's what I would like to, leave this with, and say that everybody is an absolute gift and an absolute miracle. And I celebrate that. And I hope that anything from this can help on some level. So that's my hope and desire and appreciation and
Beautiful, Erin.
gratitude towards you. Thank you for organizing.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you. Yeah, and if you're, feel like you're stuck in your life in any area, or that maybe you're just going through the motions, or you're out of balance and you're maybe only peak performing in one area, remember what Anne said, that you are an infinite miracle, and infiniteness typically is not out of balance. Infiniteness typically does not walk around feeling tired or defeated, or, so if you're feeling any of these things, just realize that you can tap back into that infinite nature that you are, and you can bring yourself back online to become a peak performer in every area of your life.
Yep.
So, and how can people connect with you? What are you up to in the world? What are you bringing forward to support people on their journey?
Yeah, so you guys, everyone can contact me. Probably the best one is Instagram at Ann Barnes. I think it's annbarnes.ceo. The company you can contact is Edica Naturals. That's spelled EDICA Naturals with an S.com. And then we're on Facebook and Instagram for that as well. And then I also have a website, annbarnes.com, just with like what I've been working on. So I've been very active in cannabis, first world's legalized cannabis production facility. Also kind of very instrumental in psychedelics, early on psilocybin adoption for mental health issues and for a myriad of other things. Have been active in soil, in terms of organic soil inputs to get away from chemicals in our soil and our water systems, and super active obviously in plant-based supplements, because that's my company, Edica Naturals. And that's sort of like the stuff that I'm working on right now. So so always looking at new things, but yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.